Okay, now let me introduce our keynote speaker to you. Dr. John Byrne, our very distinguished keynote speakers. Dr. Byrne is the president of the Foundation for Renewable Energy and Environment and a contributor since 1992 to the IPCC, the International Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which was awarded the year 2007 Nobel Peace Prize. And he is a director and distinguished professor of energy and climate policy at the Center for Energy and Environment Policy, University of Delaware. And he conceived the sustainable energy utility model, and this is a very well-recognized nice piece of work. It's recognized by the U.S. government as part of the country's Best Building Challenge. This is a very innovative financial model for a sustainable energy future, and this is recommended by the Asia Development Bank to members for affordable green energy development. Affordable is key. Right? And his work has been funded by the World Bank, UNEP, U.S. Department of Energy, among others. And Professor Byrne has been a very prolific academic, okay? And in the policy world, he is also very active. Right now, he's an advisor to the Seoul Metropolitan Government for its ambitious solar target. We are very happy to have Professor Dr. Byrne to have give us the keynote speak. So without further ado, please join me to welcome Dr. Byrne. Okay, thank you very much.
It's a real pleasure to be here. Develop Am I okay? Do you need me to? Closer. Okay. Sorry about that. So we really are excited by the work that's going on here. We applaud the AESC and the Department of Geography, and we really hope that you can continue the creative work that you have begun. So, and very grateful for that. I just want to briefly clarify. So, I've been a piece of furniture at the University of Delaware for a long time, a distinguished chaired professor, and so I think the chair means I get to sit more often or something. I'm not exactly sure, but anyway, we had worked on a variety of innovations, including the sustainable energy utility, and it was that innovation that gave rise to this foundation. This is a foundation that a group of friends put together, and the intention is that we not disturb the academic purpose of the center, but that we also try to develop applications in real time that can try and address the problems that we're facing. So it's got sort of two roles, and you'll hear a little bit more from my colleague who's with the foundation, Yop Timinio, later this morning. So I'm going to sort of get started with this discussion. I do have a little bit of a philosophic close. I just forewarn you, I'm using a video to make a larger point, which may or may not work for you, and I'm guilty if it doesn't work for you. But anyway, I just, on the front end, I'm going to be fairly to the point, I think, I hope, in this regard. So let's see. How can I, this will allow me to advance. Oh, I'm not even up yet. Yeah, sorry. I'm over there somewhere. Yeah, here we come. Okay, perfect. So, so I just want to kick off by saying I'm going to try and walk through an argument that situates the energy system and its transition. I very much agree with Professor Bailey. Energy is always in transition, a very smart and thoughtful observation, and we are at that again. I'm going to try and go through one transition that gives us the modern energy system that we have, and then talk about the transition that's underway to change that mode of both delivery of services energy, but more broadly, what is the purpose of the relationship between energy, environment, and society. So I'm going to then shift to that, and then I'm going to try and give you some suggestions on why cities are critical for that. Hopefully I can give you some evidence that will be helpful to you as you make the argument. I think cities are critical. Again, I think Professor Bailey is on the mark on that point. And then close with some thoughts on how we navigate that new direction. So with that in mind, let me start with this. You may not have known when you woke up this morning, but you live at a time in human history where we have more wealth than we have ever had before. That wealth increase, I'm a recovering economist, among other things, and this gentleman from Groningen, Angus Madison, he worked very hard for about 30 years to try and get data that you could actually compare for 5 centuries on what is the per capita income, essentially, of societies across the world, and came up with this result. And that's something that really started with, also has an energy footprint to it, and I'm going to show that in just a moment. That energy footprint really gave us this linked relationship between the modern economy and the modern energy system. It's relatively young by historic standards, but it has endured a very, very significant boom. That boom you can see in the transformation of societies generally, and since this is a cities-based conference, I thought I would give it to you in a simple visual form. If you start in the upper left-hand corner, you have what Times Square looked like about 110 years ago. And if you take a round, you can see what Times Square looks like in the bottom left-hand. And I'd ask you just to try and remember vaguely that bottom left-hand picture. It has something to do with what I'm going to try and do at the end. So it took about 120 years for this to happen in the U.S. case, and it built a formidable economic system along with an energy system that could keep feeding this kind of rapid growth. This model has gone for a walk around the world, and one of those walks is not far from you. It's just a little ways up the way here, and Shenzhen looked like this in 1980. Its economy was a modest economy, and Shenzhen at night looks like this. You can almost feel the heat of the lighting coming off of this. Anyway, you can see in the space of about 25 years. So the Shenzhen case has increased the speed by a factor of 4 against what was the case in the U.S. And that is, in a certain way, a challenge that we have. This is our success. We have gone from taking 100 years to build this kind of economy to taking 25 years to build this economy, and I assure you there are experiments underway that are building it even faster, okay? The dilemma, and this won't take long, this is 30 seconds, this is 110 years of global surface temperature. You can probably not worry until you see 1970, then you should start to worry. This is your life, okay? Oops, sorry, I always do that. Sorry. That was a nice lead-in to this wonderful, I just forgot to click on it. So, okay, here we go. So the color bar is, as you might imagine, red, orange, and yellow are increases in decadal temperature for the same area on a flat surface of the planet, and blue to white is either no change or a change that's negative. By the time you hit 70s, now 80s, and now 90s, so this is what the IPCC has been trying for quite some time to convince people in some practical way. We are in trouble. And that trouble has its basic form in, oops, what happened here? Let me try and end it. Go here, go here. You can see the tie-up between the mode of energy supply that built that industrial system, and you can see its tie-up with what is that economic development. There's been 2 times when that decoupled, 2 times. World War II and the Great Recession. If you look at the carbon curve, the carbon curve goes flat during World War II, and it goes flat during the Great Recession. Okay, the last in the 90s and the early part of the 20th century. Those are probably not good models for how we're going to decouple energy and climate, carbon and climate. So we have to find other models, and I think that's what we're trying to do here today. The impact of this link is particularly, again, Professor Bailey forecasted this, is particularly acute when it comes to the poor. Not far from here, Philippines is routinely battered now by high-intensity storms that literally send people running from their homes in order to escape the kind of problems that this is creating. This problem that the poor see the impacts faster than the rest of us is not something that's simply in one part of the world and another part of the world. I think one of our wonderful cities, some people, but New Orleans was flooded through 2 hurricanes hitting and sending, again, the same situation. The poor who could not get out of the city in time, who could not be evacuated in time, suffered extensively in this process. And we face, as a result, a problem of what folks normally refer to as climate injustice. The Paris Agreements is the first time that officially that was recognized as a phenomenon. And that phenomenon is that there are a modest number of countries that are principally responsible for the storage of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. They tend to be wealthy compared to those who provide much less storage on their part. This is the per capita emissions that you can see. If you had looked at this particular chart that we developed first in 1998, you would have seen China below the 3.3 tons per capita per year. That's fixed at 1990 population, so it doesn't help you to increase your population or anything. The 3.3 tons is basically what our planet came with an ability to sustainably absorb at world 1990 population. We have far exceeded that. We've blown past the 3.3. We have a problem that is significant and rising. And China's position in this now is, I would say, important. I'm just trying to be, okay, diplomatic about it, but it's really important. But obviously, the countries that, and the country that I come from, U.S., is number one. We have the most carbon-intensive civilization on the planet of any size. You know, there's some small countries that are, but it's number one. These are the countries that have to take the burden of action in these kinds of problems that we're now addressing. So, can we act fast enough? Can we get at the volume to address the problem of modern success? It is basically having to undo what once upon a time was defined as success and build a new strategy that we would define successfully based upon its sustainability, and I would argue also its justice, because I don't see how you get the whole world to participate if only a small minority run the next transition. So to get everyone involved, you're going to have a far more fair and just system, and you're going to have to build it around sustainability principles. That said, I don't think the problem is technology any longer. Our engineers have worked tirelessly, and we have some substantial early, in the next 10 years, kinds of solutions we can use. They're not enough, but there is plenty for us to get started in that regard. And our problem is not their cost. They are affordable, but I will give you my case for that in just a minute. So first, I just want to take you to, this is briefly what some of you may know, what's called levelized cost of energy analysis of new plant that could come online. This is prepared by the U.S. Energy Information Administration, which is an independent research organization not affected by the politics of the American system. I should say not yet, but anyway, they have worked on this kind of subject for a long, long time, and what it basically shows you is the energy system that is currently in place, the conventional energy supply system, now costs more to put a new plant into operation in 2022 than the renewable energy options and energy efficiency. we, in that sense, have the early tools that we can use right away to do a substantial first step in making these things different. It also includes wind, I want to be clear, and geothermal. Because this is a city-based narrative, I'm not looking for where we can put wind or large geothermal in cities, but I am thinking that we have two very good tools in conservation and in solar for this purpose. So I just want to, we often are asked, can we really afford this kind of stuff? I am going to try and show you that we not only can, but actually the investment base is already there. We're not using it, we need to use it, okay? But I also think it's important to ask the question of what happens when we don't act. This is simply the US case, but it is, by some measure, the wealthiest country on the planet. If you take the storms, this is the actual damage cost paid out by insurance companies or losses that government had to pay for or people who simply lost their property, okay? These are actual damages. This is not some forecast of what's going to happen. This is what happened over the last 14 years, averaging about 80 billion US dollars per year. 80 billion US dollars as in 600 billion Hong Kong dollars as in, it's a reasonable sized number, every year. And yeah, so this is a problem that I don't think that we pay attention to enough. This is not going to go away for some time, but it should give us pause as to whether we should slow down or take our time in trying to make the shift. Okay, so let me go to the next question, why cities? Cities certainly have a central role in the problem. They have been the anchors, as I suggested in the first industrial energy transition that I showed you. Cities were critical to its development, and they currently are a critical part of our problem of trying to deal with this sustainably. But they also have a very important infrastructure that can help us solve this problem. They account for 70% of all the CO2 emissions that human beings put up in the air annually, but they also, as I'm going to try and suggest to you, have the tools to make the changes needed in order to dramatically cut that kind of footprint. So let me start first just with this. Cities play an extraordinary role in both the buildup of that economic system and in the current energy problem. If you take just 5 cities in China, I'm not making a political statement, I'm just, for the purposes of this, Hong Kong is in China, I am not making a case one way or another. I am simply trying to say that the 5 large cities in the 5 cities with, in terms of emissions, okay, in China, these 5, and that's just 5, and you know, there are actually tens of thousands of cities, and just imagine if you were to be able to look at these cities as laboratories for making important change. Same thing is true in the US. We have perhaps an even greater responsibility because our 5 largest cities are more energy intensive and need to change their route even faster. And I just want to give you another one that I'm not, again, going to, if you take the 5 cities, so the circle itself is the footprint of the country, and the circles of the individual cities, okay, are their footprint. There is no way that South Korea is going to solve its, or is going to play its responsible role in this problem if it doesn't change its urban relations, okay, urban energy, environment, economy relations. So I do believe, I'm going to get into this in a moment with Seoul, I do believe that one of the factors that's driving a very interesting alternative going on in Korea is that there really is no other place to go. The government cannot say, the industries cannot say, we're going to go do this or we're going to go do that, if they neglect the urban context. And this is just 5 of their cities. If you're never going to make headway. So that's the problem. Here's a really good news, I think, okay? I remember 10 years ago when, you know, we threw around, I was in a book that was on 100% renewable energy cities. We figured, you know, maybe we'll get 10 people to read it or something. I mean, the idea of a 100% renewable energy city 10 or 15 years ago was thought to be somewhere north of a fantasy, okay? It wasn't, actually, we have a very large number of innovators, leaders in this matter, and some of the cities that I put up in those, in the case of the US and China and Korea, they are part of this march toward more renewable energy use. And if you look at already passed ordinances by cities, already passed policies and plans by cities, already done, by 2030, the number of cities committed to a 100% renewable energy footprint will have tripled, or nearly so. That's not how the world looked 10 years ago. So when people ask me, can we go fast, I just point out there's folks with track shoes on and they are running. This is not something that is just simply being thought about. This is something, I don't have time to go over the accomplishments of these cities, but these cities outpace both in their aspiration and in their accomplishment what's going on, for example, at the national level. So if you take the world average, how much, and this includes hydro, how much of our electricity systems output is generated from renewable sources, 41% or 26% is for the world as a whole, 41% is in cities. So they have been working on this for some time. And they are building plans and models that are, I think, pretty impressive. And I hope that AESC's endeavor to compare several cities and find ways. What are the drivers? Why are they doing this? What are the barriers, but what also are the opportunities? It's a really, really important piece of research. So I really hope you can. So let me give you an example of what happens when you think about this problem at the city scale rather than like we did in the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, which spent over 20 years thinking at the national level and agreements among nations. I'm not trying to not think about that, but if we don't let the cities in, we don't have the track shoes, we're not going to get the right kind of answer. So let me just give you an example. This is something that my colleague Joop Temenio will go into in detail, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time. But this is the load curve for May and for August for the city of Seoul. So this is on every hour over about 30 years, what has been the consumption of that city, okay, over time. And this is kind of mashed into, given where the economy is and all the rest, to take account for what is now. And that's the shape that it looks like. Cities have something that we can really use in this fast-paced period that are distinctive. They are the possession, the asset, the resource of cities themselves. Buildings. There are lots of buildings in cities. Okay? And those buildings have problems with using outdated equipment inside. Almost every building that I've ever seen, and most of the folks who have done this work, think that 20% reduction in energy consumption by your typical building is easy. It's self-financing. It'll pay for itself out of the savings that it'll give you in the first 10 years or so by putting that equipment in, okay? So, one thing you might do is you might imagine a role in which you go after that 20%. What would that mean? So this is in May and August when the conventional electricity system is now being driven toward what's going to be its peak. This would be the load curve that it's looking at if it did the energy efficiency component. If it used its public buildings, its schools, government offices, museums, and other things that are the possession of government, and used this as a platform to install solar on the roof. Again, this is something that I don't think many of us have looked at properly for quite some time. There's fairly interesting software out there that takes care of shading and all kind of which angle of the roof and all that kind of stuff. We're only using, in this case, if you take the public buildings, we're only using about 60% of that roof area. Most of the buildings are flat, but there are other reasons, older roofs, things like that. So we're not using all of it. We're only using part of it, okay? And this is only 16% of the city's entire rooftop area, okay? That green divot is what will happen, okay? If you now go to the commercial building sector, and ask, and particularly in a city like Seoul, where people live vertically in apartment complexes, and you use those buildings as well, you get something like this. Wait for it, yeah. So in May, during the hours of roughly 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. to 3 p.m., if you use energy efficiency to reduce that building load by that amount, and you use that rooftop real estate, which is, as I say, we're using only 45% of the roof area, so we're not being aggressive in that regard. It would actually, during those hours of 11 to 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it would be ready to offer for sale renewable energy at existing prices, not and existing efficiencies. This is not something that, you know, we pulled off the shelf and took some cell that is not going to make it to market anytime in the next 10 years. This is the stuff that's already in the market, and it's against the prices that already are paid. How are we going to do this? The city itself would then create an entity, I'm going to show you that in a second, would create an entity that would allow, okay, for that reduction in energy requirement to be used as the ability to finance the investment. That is, the city becomes and it doesn't have to be city scale, it can be community scale. We talked yesterday about this. You can make community scale that would allow residents, would allow everybody, businesses, everybody to choose that they would like to come in, okay, and be a part of this, this process. That pooling process would then allow them to get much lower prices for the technology, get much better installation costs than what now exists, and they would allow communities to become actually self-governing. They could come in, they could make decisions, whatever way you want to go, okay? You could come in and begin the process. Impact, 66% of all daytime electric need in the city of Seoul could be met through this current. This is not something where we have to go to the next stage. There's no storage in here yet, for example. Nothing new on the technology front. We're not putting any large economic incentives in that the government has to pay for. All we're taking are the savings. Now you don't have to buy that amount of electricity. You can either save or take from your own rooftop real estate, okay? So I'd like to introduce to you one very brilliant guy and one guy who got lucky to be in the picture with him, okay? Mayor Park Won-sun has made it a goal that by 2022, Seoul will, as a city, reduce its building energy requirement by 30% and will install 1 gigawatt of solar on its rooftops. We had no idea. We thought we could say this stuff as academics and then walk away, and that would be the end of it, okay? He has the support of his citizens and his businesses for doing this. It is really, I think, quite remarkable story. I'm not going to get into City of New York. We've done the same thing. We use a database called LiDAR data to do this. That's the best we have for this kind of thing, and my colleague Yop Tominio is going to go in this, so I'm just showing you, in the case of New York, they have surplus in summer months, okay, that they can then release, and they're about the same daylight hour electricity use. One thing that comes up sometimes is what happens to the economy. The economy right now is an economy that is ripe for this transition. There are more jobs being created per $1 million investment in the renewable side than there are for obvious reasons. We worked on coal plants for a long time. We have gotten some really, really spectacular efficiency out of them. There's not a lot left to find, okay? But we have done next to nothing by comparison in our buildings and asking human beings to think about options that they would like to get in. So in the U.S. case, we now have roughly 40% of the jobs that exist in the energy sector come from renewables, not from. And if you put energy efficiency in there, it triples the amount. So I'm closing. Where's the money? How are we going to do this? In nearly all cases, this is something you have to be careful about, but in nearly all cases, the average price we now pay to use electricity is higher than the price that it would take, monetized properly, for an investment in sustainable energy. If you combine solar and energy efficiency together, that area that you see between the blue bars and the yellow bars is investable funds. You're paying for it now. The money's going. It exists. It's not someplace you don't have to go find it someplace else. It already exists. It's in your checking account, and you're making the payment. Okay. The question is, are you going to use that payment to continue the existing system, and then try to figure out how to, on top of that, move forward with a transition? It's a model. You can do it. I'm just saying there is another model. Okay, which is that you capture that that payment and use that payment to underwrite this new investment. Can it work? So this is last points. Sustainable energy utility was created in Delaware to begin. It's now in several states in the U.S. and it's also in other countries. And its first organized effort was to invite governmental entities to come in and have an aggressive energy efficiency. We didn't do so much on solar at the time, to come in and try and make the case for this approach. We bundled together $110 million of investment. The companies that did the construction have to stand by a guarantee that we wrote, the Sustainable Energy Utility wrote. It's a guarantee that's very favorable to the participant, and they made a $148 million guarantee against the $110 million cost. That's the all-in over the entire life of the project, 20 years in this case. Folks who know me, you would have never guessed that I would have been in front of Standard & Poor's rating analysts talking about how to rate this thing. This was not my thing, and I learned a lot of this along the way, but anyway, we got AA+ rating, okay, for this can sustainable energy. We didn't know we were issuing a green energy bond. We went through the municipal bond market, which is how we pay for schools and hospitals and wastewater treatment and so on. That's how we did it. We did not get any subsidy. There is no ratepayer payment into this. There is no taxpayer payment into this. We simply used the guarantee of payment for those avoided energy costs that then was first used to pay the companies, the energy service companies that bid for this. And these were all big balance sheet companies. And the red line is the rate of investment in the U.S. of the current utility system. Current utility system invests in its earnings about 5% for savings against serving consumption. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. The system worked. That success that I gave you on the front end is not something that you can just poo-poo, okay? It worked, okay? But the business model looks at energy efficiency and renewable energy as problematic if it goes too fast or gets into too great a volume. So this is all the U.S. utilities over the last 12 years, and their investment rate of investment, savings against supply, is roughly around 4%. I give you just 3 examples of SEUs. They are somewhere north of 15% for the same period of time, and in the case of the Delaware SEU, because it financed a 20-year commitment, that's a sure term for you to get out somewhere near 25%, okay? How's it doing? So there's been two full years since this investment was made, since the construction was completed. Every project in the pool is over-earning against guarantee, because no one in the company wants to go back to their boss and say, I screwed up on the estimate. I overestimated the savings, and so you have to dip into the company treasury and pay. They have a natural incentive to underestimate, which is good if you want to go fast in this direction. So let me suggest to you my final philosophic point for this purpose. So all of this is sort of, I think, what the IPCC has been doing for some time. The companies are doing it, both the utilities and others, trying to look at how we can position ourselves to make this sustainable energy pathway happen faster and in larger volume, okay? And I think we have to do that reasoning. I'm not arguing against that. But there is also something that we currently do not see, something that we currently do not experience, and something that we cannot know because we don't have that energy transition. But there are ways to try and understand what it could be like if we changed from the system that we now have to a new system. And for this, I'm going to show you now this clip. It comes from a project called Sky Glow Project, okay? The backdrop is New York City. I asked you to remember that. The backdrop is New York City, and what would happen in New York City at night if the energy, environment, society relation was built on sustainability principles rather than its current approach. Okay, so what we cannot see, what we cannot experience, what we cannot know, but we could. So they didn't move to another galaxy. They're there. Stars do exist. Once upon a time, we used to be able to see them with regularity. And if we change the path, we have to meet the economic requirements, the technical requirements. We have to meet the policy requirements. We have to meet the equity requirements. All of these must be met. But there's also something waiting that would be different and perhaps really important to us if we were to change in this direction. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Dr. Byrne, for a very inspiring keynote. Now, I think we have a few minutes to take one or two quick comments or questions. Anyone would like to share comments?
Stunned, yeah.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Testing.
Would you please identify yourself and your affiliation?
Joel Lakin, Secretary.
Yeah, it's on.
Secretary General of the IPPF. That was fabulous. It was certainly worth the trip out from Hong Kong Island to catch your fantastic opening. Okay, you've got this in America, this so-called Green Marshall Plan that AOC is talking about.
Green New Deal, yes.
And you've got a great deal of antipathy or lack of interest from the federal government, the gutting of EPA, a whole range of other stuff. Where is the basic, other than Newsom in California, where is the real action coming from to push things forward in the states? I mean, this is probably an unfair question because we're running a little past out of time here, but a quick response from you. Where, Delaware, that's great, but where else? Any place else other than California?
Well, it's a valid question. It's a good question. I do want to clarify, Green New Deal is actually much broader than simply the energy, environment, society relation. It's also to get the healthcare right and retirement and a lot of other things. So it's a big vision, and the UN actually began this discussion, and then it came to recently by an amazing congressperson who was just recently elected. If you get a chance to see Alexandria Cortez, I would definitely run, not walk, to find the opportunity. Anyway, on your question, 34 states in the U.S. currently require, as a condition of sale of electricity into them, that they provide a mechanism for the purchase of renewable energy in them. Those percentages range somewhere between 20% and 50%. There will be new actions taken in the next couple of years that will push that boundary out even higher. 34 states. I can assure you that not all states fell for I don't believe, if you really go to California, California is not simply environmentalists running amok or something like this, okay? California has a model, a really good model. It really works, okay? But it's only one of those 34 states. It is probably the most popular energy policy right now in the United States to require as a condition of sale for electricity. Are they meeting? There is no, in the 34 states, there is no state that will fail to meet its initial scheduled requirement by 2025 or thereabouts, okay? So they're all on course to make their goals. Secondly, there are 23 states that have as a condition of operation in a state, that they must have a certain percentage reduction, absolute percentage reduction in the sale of electricity. Again, the U.S. is not the place where you could make the argument that somehow, environmental politics took over or something. Environmental politics is key and important, okay? But the arguments to answer your question, the arguments that are being made for this is that jobs argument that I showed you, that the local economy is better off today if it invests in this new direction rather than trying to stay. And it's the federal government that's trying to resist, not the local government, okay? So, and cities are even more aggressive, as I tried to suggest to you, okay? It's not simply New York. Los Angeles just made an announcement, Job, to buy, do we know the size of the solar?
400 megawatts.
Okay, so they're going to buy a 400 megawatt system at 2 US cents a kilowatt hour. That's not because the installers in the U.S. have gone crazy and they have some kind of donor class that's giving them money. The market process is working for that, but particularly the city of Los Angeles' residents and businesses want this. They want a future that says that my energy price is not going to climb like it has in the past. And you can get that with energy conservation and renewable energy.
Thank you very much. Let's continue the dialogue with Dr. Byrne over the tea break and lunch time.